Greetings, everybody. Thank you for joining us for day two, for the session number three for the students' talk. And we have some very fabulous speakers here. All four of them are here. And as I've been instructed, we will follow as their names have been mentioned in the abstract book. I hope that's okay with everybody. Just reiterating that every speaker has 15 minutes to speak. If you need some kind of a notice or some kind of a message that your time is up, I can happily provide that for you. And afterwards, we will have a 5 minutes Q&A session. And if I'm incorrect, I mean, the organizers can correct me. And then we will have the next speaker. And hopefully, we will have a wonderful time here. So with that, I would like to request our first speaker. So firstly, I would like to call Julia Roque. I apologize if I mispronounce her name. And they will be presenting on Playful Becoming's Situation, Dog Human Play in Resistance and Oppressions. And they are a PhD candidate at the University of Guelph. I would request one more thing before we start. So I don't know the presenter's pronouns. So I'll be grateful if you can add that in there after the name section so I don't by mistake use the wrong pronouns. So thank you. And over to Julia.
So my name is Julia Linares-Roake. I am a PhD candidate at the University of Guelph in what is commonly known as Ontario, Canada. I am getting my PhD in family relations in human development and have had the great pleasure to be working in the Phyto lab with my advisor, Dr. Andrea Breen, for the past few years. My research comes out of this lab and is looking at dog-human play and the ways in which we situate dog-human play in both resistance and oppression. So before I start talking about my dissertation, I want to talk a little bit about how I'm positioning my research. The Phyto lab and my own work is really interested in unsettling human exceptionalism and this idea that humans are in some way exceptional or at the top of a hierarchical chain of beings. I'm also really interested in making non-human animals more present within the research, thereby decentering the human just a little bit in the ways that we can, while also acknowledging that as a human, I am the one doing this research. I'm also really interested in navigating and acknowledging systems of power and oppression across species and also within species, and in centering relational approaches. So I did want to begin my introduction to my dissertation by thanking all of those who have given their stories to me. I will be presenting on digital stories. So those are 4 to 6 minute multimedia stories where participants were talking about their relationships with their dogs through play. All of them were absolutely wonderful to work with and overly generous in allowing me to use their stories here today and for my dissertation. My dissertation is interested in following play from a critical theoretical standpoint. And the question I was trying to answer with my dissertation is how might following play in all of its forms and definitions illuminate both tensions and possibilities within the contextual relationships between humans and domestic dogs. There were three main aims for my thesis. The first was to center a playful and relational approach to both honor the stories of the storytellers while also trying to make both dogs and cats more present within the research. I also wanted to move away from succumbing to these feelings of hopelessness, which can be common when you use critical theory or when you look at systems of oppression. And that was one of the reasons why I was interested in centering both joy and play. Now, this research is not meant to be generalizable, but instead it's meant to follow and respect powers of relationality in creating change in the ways in which we become with and live with more than human others. My second aim was to advance theoretical and methodological approaches in multi-species relationships and to advance our understandings of multi-species play. So through this presentation, I am going to pull from three data sets. The first is my autoethnographic field notes that started in about 2022, where I chronicled my journey with my dogs and my one cat. I also am going to be pulling from the stories of five digital storytellers who again told a story about dog-human play in their own lives. And I'm going to bring these together through artistic inquiry. Artistic inquiry, such as poems, collages, and soundscapes. These were all meant to try to decenter the human and to make our relationships with dogs a little bit less. Oh my gosh, Donna Haraway talks about how when we other ourselves from our relationships with our dogs, when we make our relationships with our dogs unfamiliar, then we can live better lives with them. And so that was part of what the artistic inquiry was trying to do. I also pull from results from a scoping review, which is currently under review, that looks at the landscape of dog-human play today. So this is an example of one of my field notes from July 11th, 2023, where I was talking about two of my dogs, Tabitha and Scarlet. And I noted that Tabitha would initiate play with Scarlet and the two would be off, racing around the patio and often under my chair, with Scarlet popping out like a hungry hippo. They would slow by engaging in lazy play, little nips and rollovers as one grabbed the other by the scruff of the neck. This is what my autoethnographic fieldwork was looking at for the past 3 years. It was looking at play both between my dogs, between myself and my dogs, and between other actors in the households. My spouse, my cat, for example, other people who came and visited. Before I start talking about my central arguments in my dissertation, I do want to take a step back and ask the question, what is it dog-human play? And what do we mean when we talk about dog-human play? So Mark Beckhoff and Berg Hart have noted that traditionally, anything that can't be explained within ethological or animal behavior research is often lumped into play, which makes it a smorgasbord of research with conflating ideas and definitions of what it means to play with others. When we were doing the digital stories, when I was preparing for the digital storytelling workshop, I was thinking about whether I wanted to define play for storytellers before they came in or not. And one of the things that we decided was not to define what play was. We gave storytellers examples of how some people were seeing dog human play and social play, but we were more interested in how they were defining play and how they were operationalizing play within their own lives. So there were no restrictions on how they were showing play within their stories. And a lot of the stories had really untraditional ways of looking at dog human play or play within our relationships between humans and dogs. So, an example here is from one of our storytellers, Jill, who told the story of Bill and Duke, her two dashing dachshunds. And at the end, Jill has what she terms a blooper reel. And in this blooper reel, she shows videos of her dogs doing things that she found comedic. So one of her dogs had lost all of their teeth in a veterinary surgery. And so one of the videos was the dog walking around with his tongue hanging out, which was her version of playing when thinking about her relationship with her dogs. So I'm going to turn now to Berghardt and what Berghardt talks about as the five criteria of play. And I'm going to put these criteria of play into relationship with both the scoping review and with the stories told by both the digital storytellers and my autoethnography. So Berghardt's first criteria of animal play is that play is behavior that's not fully functional. For example, it doesn't contribute to immediate survival. However, when we were looking at the scoping review of dog human play literature, we found that fetch is one of the most commonly cited types of play in dog human literature, and often play is used as a function to tire dogs out. Additionally, research by Protopova et al. In Florida, the United States, noted that shelter dogs who did not play were less likely to be adopted, which meant that they were likely at higher risk of euthanasia in kill shelters. So, to these dogs, being able to play in a way that humans wanted them to, often through fetch, was contributing to their immediate survival, which challenges this criteria that behavior is not fully functional. Burkhart's second criteria is that behavior is voluntary, intentional, pleasurable, and or rewarding. But research from Horowitz and Hecht suggests that humans don't always enjoy playing with their dogs. And we have good reason to believe that dogs might not always enjoy playing with their humans in the way that humans like to play with dogs. And we also know that much of the research on dog-human play is done in a structured environment with rules chosen by humans. So an example of this is the strange situation test, which is used to measure a dog's attachment to their humans, or the dog mentality assessment, which is often used with show breeds and with purebred dogs to see how playful they are with humans. This brings up the question is around, is this voluntary, pleasurable, or rewarding for the dogs? And further, if we are living in relationships with dogs, especially, and this is especially true of Western spaces and Western countries, when we are the legal guardians of our dogs and our dogs have no choices as to whether they live with us or not, do dogs have a choice in play? While I was looking at the digital stories, I had created a soundscape using two of those digital stories. And this soundscape brought in noises around dog human play, around the humans playing with their dogs, dogs playing with humans. And one of the things that came out of this soundscape was the sound of geese honking as they were disrupted during a particularly playful adventure that I was having with my dog, Scarlet. What listening to the soundscape made me think about was what about those less cute creatures who are interrupted during our play? When we disrupt creatures such as geese and squirrels when we're playing with dogs, are we really unsettling human hierarchies, or are we only lifting dogs up closer to being an animal that quote unquote matters? So Burghart's fourth criteria of play is that play is repetitive, but not stereotyped. If we return to the example of fetch, fetch can easily turn obsessive and stereotyped for dogs, and yet it's still an incredibly common form of dog-human play. And when we think about play as repetitive, when we think about it as time-based and bound, I also think that this ignores the impact of time on play. So for two digital stories, the storytellers were really focused on time. One digital storyteller was thinking about the way in which her dog experienced joy and played in the garden, both in the winter and in the summer, while the other, whose images are shown here in relation to images from my own field notes, was thinking about the ways in which her relationship shifted through time, through 40 years of living with her family and changing human and animal configurations. So one of the things that I was thinking about in this definition of play is how can we think about play in a way that's dynamic and relational, and also changes as our household configurations change, as our relationships change, as our contexts change. Finally, Burkhardt notes that animals play if they are not under stress and if they have their needs met. But when I was looking at the digital stories, one digital story put into relationship with mine brought this a little bit into question. And I was thinking about how the home can be a stressful place for an animal, especially when we consider that they are captive to humans when humans are their legal guardians, and or when there are children in the house. So I put forth a poem here that I had created with my own field notes. This was from August 2023 when we were dealing with some construction on our house. So we were continuously moving and the dogs were put into boarding for what we hoped was their own comfort. And this is told from the point of view of my dog, Bree. And I note that home tends to move a lot. Smells like sweat and stress. One day we are placed in our own cage. We get to play at this new place, but the cage smells of stress and fear. I do not feel safe. The humans return, my whole body shakes, I dance in place. We're all tangled, but I don't care. So I think about this, how we sent our dogs to this boarding and this daycare so that they had time to play, but we also knew that the dogs were stressed from this boarding space. And how can that be true if we think about Burkhart's fifth criteria of play, that animals must not be under stress in order to play? It was something that I thought about a lot through my dissertation. So in my dissertation, I argue that when we have narrow definitions of play, that we tend to miss a lot of play that is actually happening in households, and that these narrow definitions of play can be ableist, and miss nuances. So I was talking to a digital storyteller earlier this week. They gave me permission to share what they were thinking, and they noted that when they first joined the digital storytelling workshop, they were really worried about the focus on play because they and their dog didn't play in the ways in which they see in social media and they see in the news. And so they were worried that they wouldn't be able to convincingly tell a story. When we left it open-ended onto how they define and thought about play, the storyteller talked about how excited she was to create her story, and now she shares her story with friends and family. When we think about narrow definitions of play, it also raises questions around, is play necessarily fun for both sides of the party? And what does this mean for creatures and beings beyond the human-dog dyad? I see that I'm at 5 minutes, so I'm just going to finish with one of the things that I was thinking about. So, one of the things that I concluded is that dog human play is embedded with oppressive traditions and cannot be disentangled from legacies of domestication and captivity. This doesn't mean that, as Leslie Irvine writes, that play can't be a micro practice of resistance against human hierarchies, but rather, as Christine Kelly notes, that play must be embedded as part of rather than in opposition to issues of abuse, violence, and oppression. So, my second argument is that our play relationships do not dismantle hierarchical regimes between humans and dogs, but rather they provide spaces of resistance to human hierarchy through close attention to the other player across species lines. So, in thinking about this, when we do play with our dogs, there is still this element of hierarchy between human and non-human animals. However, there are pockets, small pockets of resistance because we are paying such close attention to those non-human others. I'll end here with a poem that was created with my autoethnographic field notes as well as with a digital story. This is going back again to Jill and the two dashing dachshunds. Um, this poem was really looking at people say, I say, in which people were imparting social norms upon what dog-human relationships should be. And in Jill's voice, the dogs were responding with how they actually were. So I'll read just a few lines, but it notes people say I'm awkward. I've noticed that Bree has most of her personality when she thinks nobody is watching. I say I am unique. Bree is lying next to a box, licking it. People say I am lazy. Bree is sleeping over a vent, which seems uncomfortable. I say I just like to relax. So I think that when we think about play and think about both the oppressive logics and histories that it inherits through our use and operation of play, but we also think about it as a way to be closer with the non-human other, humans and non-human others, then there is this real potential to start to think about things differently. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that wonderful question, and thank you so much for your presentation. We will now move to our next presenter, which is Nessie O'Neill. I hope that's
Hi.
pronounced correctly.
Yeah, that's right.
And her topic is titled Social Cues and Species Risk, Understanding Tourist Behavior Towards the Critically Endangered Pygmy Raccoon of Cozumel. And she is a master's student at the University of Ohio. Over to you.
Hi, yes, my name is Nessie O'Neill. I am a master's student at Miami University in Ohio. And today I'll be talking to you guys about how social interactions between humans actually inform their behavior with the pygmy raccoon of Cozumel. So, a little bit of background on the pygmy raccoon. Oh, let me move this out of my way. So, the pygmy raccoon, Procyon pygmaeus, is the smallest of the three species of raccoon. Now, most of us are familiar with the common raccoon, which is found from Canada down to Panama. There's another species, there's the South American raccoon, which is found from Panama down to Argentina. And then the Cozumel raccoon, or the pygmy raccoon, is found only on the island of Cozumel. It is a critically endangered species, and there are less than 200 mature adult individuals. Um, they are greatly threatened by tourism growth, by road expansion, invasive predators like boa constrictors and domestic dogs, as well as hurricanes. Now, a little bit of background. Tourism is Cozumel's #1 industry. The island hosts over 4 million visitors each year. As you can see on the map, it is an island off of the coast of the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. And the tourism industry, although it is good for the economy, unfortunately has a significant impact on the environment. And since 1994, there has been a noted need for research into how tourism has impacted the pygmy raccoons. Because we know that it's happening, we know that it's impacting the environment, and study after study on these raccoons has called for this research, but nothing has really been done, unfortunately. So, what we do know about how tourism is impacting raccoons is actually coming from other studies. So, trying to figure out where they are located on the island, what their sleep wake cycles are, things like that. Now, unfortunately, as a result of tourism, the pygmy raccoon has become highly habituated. For those who are unaware, wildlife habituation is the process by which an animal shows reduced response to repeated human presence or stimuli. So they will appear tolerant and indifferent over time. In the pygmy raccoon's case, they have become quite friendly. So coming up to people and asking for food. What causes this in the case of the pygmy raccoons is improper human-raccoon interactions, as well as open access to garbage. And so these things are increasing habituation. Oddly enough, the pygmy raccoons have actually changed their sleep-wake cycle in order to coincide with tourist presence. So like most raccoons, they used to be kind of crepuscular, nocturnal, awake during dawn and dusk and into the evenings. Now, they're awake for brunch. So they are coming out when these cruise ships are coming in, when fishing boats are coming in, bringing in fresh fish for tourists, when the cruise ships are bringing in the actual tourists, so they can beg. And then they will go back to sleep for the rest of the day. And then in the evening, they will wake back up after all the tourists have gone and start scrounging for food again. This is more common with the northern population of the pygmy raccoons because they are broken up into two populations. The southern population of raccoons is more so active during the hours of 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. when the beach clubs are open and the tourists are there. And their territories now do coincide with the very popular tourist hotspots because they are coming to where the food is and where the food is easiest to get. So here's a map of their current territories. The northern population, you have the cruise ship pier. So that's right around here. And there's actually a mall there. And this week, 2 raccoons were removed from inside the mall because they were in there trying to beg for food. There are more resorts up here. The fishing pier is up near the top. And then there is a popular tourist hotspot known as Passion Island. And then down at the bottom, you have more resorts and more beach clubs. And then you have Punta Sur, which is the island's national park or protected park. Now, unfortunately, like I said, they are broken up into 2 populations, and there's a significant issue with genetic bottlenecking. Their population size has really decreased, and there's a higher rate of inbreeding now. And that is because they are really struggling. There are roads, as you can see across here, that they struggle to pass. So I'm going to show y'all this video of a highly habituated raccoon at a beach club in Cozumel so y'all can kind of understand what's happening here. So he's reaching out his hands, he's getting food. You have this other little guy right here, and they know to reach out, ask her, and he's now interrupting. But yeah, they are literally asking tourists food. Now, here are some outcomes of habituation. Habituation is bad for raccoons and it is bad for people. And I think that it's important that all parties, the raccoons, the humans, the local community, and business owners are thought about when habituating wildlife. So I'm going to give you all a few different examples of habituation and in the raccoons specifically, and how it is bad for both the raccoons and the humans. So in one case that I was told by a beach club owner, they locked up all of their alcohol behind the bar, and the raccoons had been highly habituated by tourists, came in the night, they started busting open the locks, breaking open all of the cabinets, and stealing like $1,000 worth of tequila and carrying it off. So one, they're destroying this property. And two, they are accessing dangerous substances. Raccoons do not need to be drinking tequila. And then they are causing financial loss, unfortunately, for this business. In another interaction, unfortunately, the raccoons are climbing up on tables where tourists are dining. They are, when the tourists are not feeding them, they get on the tables, they put their hands all up in the food. They will literally grab food off of the plate and then scamper away. Again, businesses are losing money because tourists will send the food back. They say, I don't want this, a raccoon has touched it. And then the raccoons are eating things that cause health issues. Unfortunately, raccoons are very prone to diabetes, and they also really struggle to break down grilled foods and foods cooked at high temperatures because they do not have certain CYP liver enzymes that help them break those things down. The raccoons also have started biting. When they expect food and they are not receiving food, then they will bite tourists, which is causing businesses to lose customers and receive bad reviews on social media, and is also putting the raccoons at risk for physical harm, because when tourists get bit, they are likely to punch or fight back against the little raccoon. And unfortunately, biologists on Cozumel are very concerned that these negative interactions with these raccoons will result in a lack of conservation interest. So we really do want people, the locals and the tourists alike, and the business owners, to want to protect these animals. So my goal with my research is to inform interventions that reduce habituation rates and promote raccoon conservation that ensures tourist safety and helps businesses avoid liability. So I'm trying to understand how humans and raccoons are interacting within the tourism industry. I'm looking at inappropriate behaviors, things like feeding raccoons, approaching raccoons, people holding out their hands to let them sniff, people chasing them, taking selfies or other close photos, and playing with the raccoons. I am working with Cozumel's Parks and Museums Department, as well as the state's Ecology Department, to gain access to sites and to speak with tourism industry staff and watch tourists. I'm also partnering with Exotic Pet Wonderland Animal Sanctuary here in Tennessee to observe highly habituated raccoons. Although these are not Procyon pygmaeus, these are Procyon loader, the behavior is quite similar. I've also been looking at social media videos of human-raccoon interactions in Cozumel, which has provided a good baseline for how tourists are interacting with the raccoons. And I recently conducted a cross-sectional web survey of 90 tourists from the US who visited Cozumel and interacted with these raccoons. These questions covered demographics, prior knowledge, emotional response, and experiences with the raccoons. So here's what I found out with that study. Demographics had no impact on how people were interacting with raccoons. Education also had no impact on how they were going to interact with the raccoons. 67% of respondents did not know that the raccoons were a separate species, and 81% did not know that the raccoons on Cozumel were endangered. Interestingly enough, when learning about the pygmy raccoon from locals, tourists were 4 times more likely to learn the raccoons were a separate species, but they did not learn that they were endangered. Emotional responses like being excited or scared of the raccoons also did not have any impact on whether or not people were approaching or feeding raccoons. Tourists who described feeling predominantly excited or happy about seeing a raccoon were statistically just as likely to approach it as those who felt cautious, wary, or afraid. What did have an impact, however, was situational or social cues, and that was the main influencing factor on human-raccoon interactions. Now, the reason behind this is theory called social proof, which refers to the way that individuals look at behavior or opinions as others to guide their own. So when they are seeing another tourist feeding a raccoon, that drastically increases the likelihood of approaching or feeding a raccoon. The thought process behind social proof is if everybody else is feeding the raccoons and nobody is getting in trouble and nobody is getting seriously hurt, then it must be okay. And then also relaxed norms during leisure time and vacations are also making people more receptive to copying risky behavior. You're on vacation having a good time. Everybody else is on vacation having a good time. Everybody's drinking margaritas. It makes you very easy to influence. There are also reports of beach club employees feeding these raccoons and telling tourists that it is okay to feed the raccoons, which are further reinforcing these norms. Parents are also encouraging their children to feed and approach raccoons. This was something that I saw multiple times. And then you also have groups that are directly pressuring one another. So you'll have full groups of families and friends saying, oh, just give him a chip, he's not going to hurt you, he's not going to bite you. So people are directly influencing one another. Social media is another major influencer. Social media is a new form of social proof where people are learning what is okay and what is not okay. The rate of inappropriate interactions with raccoons is disproportionately higher on social media than it is in the self-reported survey. And videos of interactions with wildlife in captivity can also influence how people interact with and perceive them in real life. And then as well as accounts with large followings that glamorize raccoon habituation. On TikTok, there's this account called Raccoon Drive-Thru, where you have this lady feeding raccoons that come to her window. There's the raccoon daycare, where this woman is providing food and enrichment for wild baby raccoons. And then you have influencers promoting places like Raccoon Island, which is a place in Florida where tourists can go and essentially feed wild raccoons. All of these things are telling people it is okay to feed raccoons. It is okay to approach raccoons. Likes, shares, and follow counts on videos on social media serve as cues that these behaviors are acceptable. Additionally, social media is impacting this behavior because business owners fear retaliation if they remove guests from the property for feeding raccoons, or even if they ask guests to stop. So instead, they don't, which further enforces that feeding and approaching these endangered raccoons is okay. And then you also have the raccoon-initiated interactions. In the online survey, every tourist who fed a raccoon first had been approached by one. Begging gestures like standing on their hind legs, putting out their hands, trigger the tourist's compliance. And unfortunately, the average person does not know what they are looking at when it comes to animals. They don't know what aggressive behavior is. They don't know what raccoons are supposed to eat. They really don't know what is going on. All they see is a cute little animal putting his hands out and politely asking for food. And that was something that I heard over and over and over again. It's like, why are you feeding him? Well, he looks so polite. He looks so polite. So many people told me the exact same thing. And unfortunately, pygmy raccoons exhibiting these bold behaviors are more likely to receive food, which creates a feedback loop. Raccoons learn that approaching humans leads to food, and tourists interpret this approach as an invitation to feed them, to know that it is okay to feed them. And there is a line. If a raccoon gets too bold, however, like jumps on a table or tries to steal food, they are more likely to become a victim of human aggression and also not get any food at all. So humans are approaching their own social norms and expectations upon these raccoons, which don't understand social norms in the first place. If a raccoon is rude, they're not going to get fed. And unfortunately, bites and scratches are often occur when raccoons expect food, but none is offered. So if somebody's holding out their hand to allow the raccoon to sniff it like a dog, and the raccoon sees that as somebody offering them food, and then they're like, wait, there's no food here, I'm going to bite this person. So in order to fix this, we really need to work on shifting social norms. First off, we need to be training staff, guides, and locals to model proper behavior and provide immediate correction when people are interacting with these endangered raccoons in inappropriate ways. We need to be using social media travel influencers as social proof to really make it cool to interact with raccoons properly. If you have popular influencers modeling appropriate behavior for raccoons and other wildlife, that is telling these younger generations who are on social media media what is the acceptable way to behave. There needs to be consistent messaging across beach clubs and parks in order to reduce mixed signals. There needs to be signage with clear messaging. There are signs that are very small and say, "Don't feed the raccoons," but it needs to say things like, "I am critically endangered. Feeding me can kill me." Very clear. Encouraging children to get involved has also been shown to be helpful in other situations. So children often act as ways to educate their parents. And then reducing approach opportunities by securing waste and clearing food quickly. Humane context-specific deterrence, where raccoons tend to table serve, so methods of hazing. And then also getting the local community on board in order to minimize social media backlash. So if people are going to be told, "Hey, please don't feed the raccoons," or if they're going to be asked to leave a location due to feeding the raccoons, they are very likely to get on social media, to get on Yelp or something and start leaving bad reviews, which is what is discouraging business owners from actually enforcing their rules of no feeding raccoons. So if we have the community involved, if we have, there's a large expat community as well in Cozumel, and if they know to jump on and say, "Hey, that's not cool, you are in the wrong here," that is going to reduce any kind of backlash from others or any kind of concern from these business owners. So as far as future plans go for this specific research, I intend to do further interviews with beach club and park staff in order to better understand the industry staff's interactions with tourists, because that was a lot of concerns that I got in the written responses for the study, was that these beach club staffs are interacting with these raccoons in really kind of cruel ways, or they're the ones who are encouraging feeding. So I will be continuing to interview them. And more research needs to go into what is stopping tourists from feeding and approaching these raccoons, because we know why they're doing it, but now I'm really interested in why are people not doing it, and really trying to push that. As well as creating social marketing campaigns to encourage appropriate behaviors around raccoons. Like I said, with the influencers, right, we want people to know the appropriate way to behave, and that is going to influence them. And then finally, determining proper protocol for raccoon deterrent. So what kind of hazing is going to be humane and is going to be effective? Is clapping your hands going to work? We tell people here in Gatlinburg, if they approach a bear, to haze it, to, hold up their hands and scream, or to bang pots and pans together. What is going to work to do that? And what is going to, not pull people out of their vacation mindset and kind of ruin the tourist experience? Because we really do want everybody to be happy and safe and healthy in the end. Thank you so much. And now if anybody has any questions, I am more than happy to answer.
Thank you so much for that. Yes, I think we have our first question. I saw a hand up. Thomas, would you like to ask it?
Oh, that's not a question.
I love it though. You'd happily trade lives existing with the
Yeah,
raccoons
I
and snacks in
volunteer as
paradise.
tribute for that. I mean, it sounds great. I have to
Well,
say, I
that's
would be one of the people who was a problem because I would totally hang out with the raccoons and it would be bad. You would not like it because
I know. Oh, a big card swim by. No, I get it. It is so stressful for me because I was down there and I was literally there on my day off. So I was hanging out, I had a margarita, and I had a little juvenile raccoon come up to me, tug on my skirt, and then hold its hands out like it was asking, "Please, sir, might I have some more?" And I was like, oh my God. And I think that if I did not know how bad this was for the raccoons and everything that happened as a result of habituation, I would have easily fed them. And we do know that there is kind of an issue with pygmy raccoons and common raccoons in general, and in alcohol. So in Germany, the invasive raccoons are breaking into people's homes and stealing their beer. In Kentucky recently, a woman just had to give a raccoon CPR, which I would never recommend doing. Don't give strange animals CPR, but gave it CPR because it was drunk on moonshine. So raccoons do love alcohol, and I think maybe we should keep them away from that.
raccoons are awesome. I mean, I want to party with raccoons.
It's pretty cool. Are there any other animals, or what other animals are problematic in tourist hotspots? So one animal and this is not really an issue in Cozumel, but coatimundis, they're more closely related to the Alingo and Kinkajou than they are the raccoon, but they are still kind of in that family. And in Cozumel, they are very shy, and they will go and they'll hide during the day, and you'll really only see them at dawn and dusk. However, and these are like the critically endangered dwarf coatis. But on the mainland, on the rest of the Yucatan, coatis, they travel in large packs, and they are begging like the raccoons are, and you are more likely to see coatis begging than raccoons. Oh, does somebody have their hand up?
Yeah. Well, great job, Nessie. I really enjoyed it, and this is something that is of personal interest as well. We did a study on free-ranging dogs and cats and found very similar results to what you found, in addition to perceived commonness of that behavior of feeding the animals. And that was an important factor in our study. And I would be, yeah, if you feel like I can send that to you. And my question is there any sanctuary or rehab center or something of that nature down there that tourists can go and feed?
Unfortunately, they're not. That is something that they are working on. My partner partner for this study is the director of the ecology department of Cozumel, and he is trying to get me to move down there and start a sanctuary with him. And but right now, the raccoons, if something happens, they either get rehabbed in his home or in his apartment, or with vets in their homes personally. So there's no breeding programs, there's no sanctuary, there's no in situ conservation. Everything that's being done, which is why it's so important to make sure that these raccoons have a safe place to go and to have their babies and reproduce, and are imparting proper behaviors upon their own children, because the raccoons are learning from their mamas that this is okay to do, to go up to beg to people. So yeah. Somebody else asked, have you done any work in U.S. national parks? No, I have not, but I have done some work outside of the Smoky Mountain National Park in Gatlinburg. And I've worked with the TWRA, which is the Tennessee Wildlife Resource Agency, and I've been looking at bear habituation there.
So thank you for that. That was wonderful. Our next speaker is Marilyn and Campbell, and her presentation is titled "When is a Wild Animal Truly Free? How a book on American politics can be applied to the wild animal welfare movement." And she's an incoming graduate student at the University of Edinburgh. Over to you, Marilyn.
Great, thank you so much. And I actually do not have slides, so there's no need to give me sharing. I'm just going to ramble at everybody for 15 minutes. Hopefully only 15 minutes. Let me start my thing here to try to keep me on time. Great. So first of all, yes, I'm Marilyn. Pronouns are she, her. Thank you for joining the session today. Thank you to the conference organizers for having me. Yeah, as mentioned, I'm in Ontario, Canada as well, same as Julia. And yeah, I will be officially starting with the University of Edinburgh's online graduate program in international animal welfare ethics and law on Monday. So that hasn't started yet. So don't blame them if this doesn't go well. Yeah, as mentioned, the topic is when is a wild animal truly free? How a book on American politics can be applied to the wild animal welfare movement. And just to be clear, this is an idea I'm just starting to explore as I head into my studies. We may have some guests during this. So I'm very happy to hear any thoughts in the comments of the Q&A after. A content note, I will be briefly mentioning various ways that animals are harmed, but as said, there are no slides. So the book in question is this one, On Freedom by Timothy Snyder. On Freedom is Snyder's attempt to first explore the very concept of freedom and what is required for humans to achieve it, and then lay out the practical policies that government should enact to create those conditions. Snyder argues that most people in the United States have been led to misinterpret the concept of freedom as only freedom from, such as freedom from government regulations and societal obligations, while the true definition of freedom, understood by much of the rest of the human world, is freedom to, such as the freedom to make meaningful choices about our own lives that will allow us to thrive. Freedom, he argues, is a positive state, not a negative one. Or, as he says in the book's preface, freedom is not just an absence of evil, but a presence of good. So that got me thinking, because there's this pretty widely accepted notion among many people that being free is the most important condition for any wild animal. But that definition of freedom certainly seems to be based on a negative state or a freedom from. It's simply the state of not being in a cage. I have props, apparently. So this is just a quick condensed excerpt from The Tiger Rising by Kate DiCamillo. This isn't right for this tiger to be in a cage. It's not right. We can't do nothing about it, Rob said. We could let him go, said Sistine. We could set him free. We can't, he said. There's all them logs. We can saw through them. Nah, said Rob. The mere thought of letting the tiger go made his legs itch like crazy. We have to set him free, Sistine said, her voice loud and certain. Nuh-uh, said Rob. It ain't our tiger to let go. It's our tiger to save. And that sort of is pervasive in pop culture, that, the animal being free, if anybody's seen Born Free, the movie, and of course, Free Willy, that idea is fundamental to most pop culture that deals with animals and other conversations. But then following Snyder's philosophy, perhaps a basic freedom from captivity is not enough to consider a wild animal free. Those familiar with the 5 freedoms of animal welfare, which I'm assuming is most of this audience, may have run through them quickly in your head and realized that they outline 4 negative freedoms: freedom from hunger and thirst, pain, injury and disease, distress, discomfort, and only 1 positive freedom, or freedom 2, and that's the freedom to express behaviors that promote well-being. That last one does do some heavy lifting. But the 5 freedoms are rarely applied to wild animals who aren't living in captivity. For many people, it's the opposite. It's assumed that being a wild animal means that your life will include plenty of hunger and discomfort and distress, with, again, that important trade-off being a lack of captivity or that negative state of freedom. There are some exceptions, including the wild animal welfare movement and compassionate conservation, such as the Wild Animal Initiative, who are trying to consider and improve the quality of life for free-roaming wild animals. But I haven't seen much that questioning of that basic concept of what is freedom for wildlife, or how we use the term. So this is where Snyder comes in. He identifies what he calls the 5 forms of freedom. Here come more props. Sovereignty, unpredictability, mobility, factuality, and solidarity. And we're going to go through them in his order. So, sovereignty. That's his first form. He is not talking about sovereignty of a nation, which is a concept that philosophers Sue Donaldson and Wilkin Licca have applied to wild animal societies in their book Zoopolis, which I am still reading right now, so we won't talk too much more about that. But rather, Snyder is talking about sovereignty of an individual, or autonomy, which he sums up in the preface as the learned capacity to make choices. And that learned capacity part is essential. He talks about childhood a lot in this section. The idea is that children are not sovereign individuals. They don't have the capacity to be. But childhood is essential to sovereignty, because there are certain things you really need to learn and to have access to in childhood to have the ability to become a sovereign adult. And those things absolutely require other people. Kind of ironically, no one becomes sovereign alone. You have to have things like the support needed to learn to regulate your emotions. You need stable relationships to develop your language and social skills. And you need to have physical spaces, generally created by others, that allow for free play and safely testing your limits. You have to feel secure enough to get to know yourself and the world. I think in applying this to wild animals, some people might be inclined to latch on to the idea that children can never be sovereign and apply that part, saying animals can never develop the same capacities as humans, so they can never be sovereign. But I think the far more accurate application here is the direct one. The idea that for an adult animal to ever truly be free, they are first going to need the opportunity to develop certain capacities in their youth, however long that may be. And for each species, those capacities, of course, will be different. That in itself, certainly not a novel idea. The understanding that young animals need to develop certain skills is well established among wildlife rehabbers and people running conservation breeding programs. But I think when it comes to young wild animals who are not under human care, there's not a lot of concern for the quality of their childhood, with the exception of some studies funded by Wild Animal Initiative focused on the welfare of juvenile animals. But the actual opportunities available to young animals in the wild to learn and grow, I don't see discussed as having a direct impact on their freedom. We don't say that a wild animal is less free because they grew up in a degraded habitat where the types of food they could learn to forage or hunt were severely limited. We don't say that a wild animal is less free because they're a social species, but they grew up without any others around of their own age. We don't say that noise pollution could make animals less free if it's hard for them to hear and practice their songs and calls. And maybe we should be. Maybe we should also be devoting more energy to figuring out what factors are the most important ones for various species to ensure that they get a quality education. So, number 2 is unpredictability. Snyder sums up unpredictability as the power to adapt physical regularities to personal purposes. Here he's talking about unpredictability that develops from our sovereignty, which must come first. It is when we take our unique experiences and capabilities and combine them with our values and make choices that only we could make. And this is done regardless of the ways we are being pressured to conform. Snyder doesn't say much about animals in the book, but in this section he does talk about the behavioral experiments that ultimately led to the addictive sporadic rewards doled out by slot machines and social media algorithms. In making this point about humans, though, Snyder adds, some animals are wiser than we are. When octopuses were subjected to behaviorist experiments, they reacted with less interest than did rats and pigeons. The octopuses seemed to understand that they were in a made environment and wished to pass judgment on their predicament. In one case, an octopus tried to break the machine, then raised itself out of the pool to squirt water at the experimenter. From this behavior, the human scientists concluded that octopuses were not rational, a conclusion that suggests their own mental limits. Such behaviors perhaps demonstrate that octopuses are reasonable in the sense of judging an overall situation and reacting. We should be more like that. Many animals are already unpredictable to us because we do not sense or experience or understand the world the same way they do. But when it comes to their freedom, this should be about their ability to act unpredictably within the context of their own lives. And wild animals who have grown up to be sovereign individuals very possibly do act unpredictably all the time without humans being there to see it. The problem, though, is when we choose to interfere and control wild animal lives in a way that prevents unpredictability. Emma Maris's 2021 book, Wild Souls, which I definitely recommend reading if you're finding any of this interesting, is one work that does dive in and question some of the same things I'm talking about today, although without the focus on the use of the word freedom. In the chapter between dog and wolf, she talks about human efforts to maintain the genetic integrity of certain species in the wild. She gives a true example of female wolves who successfully wooed a male dog who left his human-led home to go with the wolves as a pack. Conservation officials interfered because they did not want hybrid dog-wolf pups in the area. And there are other places in the world where dogs and wolves do interbreed, but officials simply cull any wolves who appear more dog-like. Of course, this takes away a sovereign wolf's freedom to choose their own mate, to be unpredictable by selecting a member of a related species or subspecies who looks and behaves either slightly or wildly different than they do. These are the sorts of choices that drive both biological and cultural evolution within a species, but by trying to control the wolves' mating choices, we are removing their freedom to make those unpredictable choices. As Maris says on page 51, wolves as symbols of wilderness are so culturally important that we humans will go to great lengths to protect the species' purity, even if doing so involves restricting the freedom of actual animals. Wilderness is often defined as that which is not controlled, but paradoxically, in order to protect the wildness of the wolf gene pool, individual wolves must be controlled. Humans also interfere in an animal's ability to make unpredictable choices in less direct ways. When we limit where they can go and move them or kill them when we think they're somewhere they aren't supposed to be, birds spotted outside of their human-defined range is often hounded by bird watchers and photographers to the point of interfering with the bird's ability to rest and feed. And we just heard about the pygmy raccoons from Nessie, and here in Toronto, we are no longer allowed to feed any wildlife, including pigeons and squirrels. And of course, as we learned about, this is done for the benefit of all, and that is not something I'm disagreeing with. But it is also, we should also acknowledge that when we set those kinds of rules for humans, we're actually still putting restriction on everyone's freedom of interspecies association and preventing the animals from making choices about how to interact with their world. So, mobility. This would be the one about cages. Yes, it is. But for mobility, Snyder also writes, mobility is the third form of freedom, capable movement in space and time and among values, an arc of life whose trajectory we choose and alter as we go. For all of us, mobility means access to food, water, hygiene, healthcare, parks and paths, roads and railways to help us make what we can of our bodies. Access includes safety. We are not free to go where it is not safe to go, especially when we are responsible for children. He connects mobility to having what we need to take care of our bodies, to creating systems and structures that work for all ages and abilities, even to poverty. Snyder also talks about social mobility, which he says is supported by things like public transportation, public education, healthcare, pensions. And he specifies that none of us is capable of mobility without assistance. So, of course, not being in a cage is a factor for wild animals here, but so too are the problems of habitat fragmentation created by fences, walls, and roads, cities built where migratory rest stops used to be, swimming pools with steep sides, sewer grates, the perfect size for ducklings to fall between, even areas where hunting and trapping take place. As for animals, that is certainly not a place where it is safe to go. Light pollution may not seem like a physical barrier, but it interrupts some of animals' ability to navigate with the help of the stars. Now, many of those issues certainly are on the radar of those who care about wildlife. But again, they're rarely talked about in terms of an overall evaluation of a wild animal's freedom. And when it comes to wild animals with disabilities and the infirmities of age, if humans get involved at all, it is to end the animal's life, not to look for ways to make the world more easy to navigate for them. In Wild Souls, Emma Maris also writes, wild animals make their own choices about what to do every day. In that sense, they are free, but their bodies and minds evolved in a world profoundly influenced by humans. And all too often, their daily choices involve navigating a world that has been rearranged for human needs and desires. Factuality. Snyder sums up factuality as the grip on the world that allows us to change it. So in this section, he's talking about human access to true information. This ties back to the education of youth, the ability to critically evaluate information, also to the importance of quality journalism and the problems of media and algorithm manipulation, among many other things, which may not seem like something animals have to deal with. But are windows that reflect the sky and kill and stun migrating birds factual? What about poison baits that we manufacture to smell and taste good before they kill? Or decoys used by hunters to make an animal think an area is safe? Snyder writes, a big lie can bring down a whole country. Can a big lie bring down a whole species or a whole animal community? We may get the answer to this question as plastic becomes ever more prevalent and fish less so, and seabird parents feed colorful fragments that look nutritious to their young. Wild animals trying to navigate a world that they can't understand because of the way humans have altered it should perhaps also be talked about as being less free. And finally, number 5 is solidarity. He sums up solidarity as the recognition that freedom is for everyone. And even when we're talking about wildlife, I think this one is still for us. Humans need to acknowledge that if we care about our own freedom, then we should care about freedom for non-human animals as well. All animals, not just the ones we love to love. If we embrace solidarity, we can't only care about the tigers, the lions, the orcas, and elephants. We must also care about the freedom of the sparrow and the snake, the mouse, and the moth. Snyder writes, if freedom is a right, maintained the philosopher Joseph Raz, then it is also a duty. Freedom cannot be selfish. To declare oneself free is to promise to act such that others can be free. We must imagine a society of free people and then try to build it. And I think with this book, Snyder has inadvertently given us some guideposts to imagine a better version of wild animal freedom as well. And that's basically, I'm just going to give a quick, because I had to cut it. I didn't have time to talk about What Are Zoos For by Heather Browning and Walter Veit, but I also recommend this if you're interested in this topic. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I was just noting down the name of the book, so it took me a second to turn my camera on. So I believe we have questions. So it's Gina Craggs, and she's a master's graduate from the class of 2022 at the University of Exeter. And her presentation is titled An Entangled Exploration, the Past, Present, and Future Symbiotic Relationship Between Fly Species, Lucilia, sericata, and Humans. Over to you, Gina.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so thank you very much for attending this presentation, and particularly thanks to Chris for the support and giving in the run-up for today. My name is Gina Craggs. I have an MA in anthrozoology at Exeter, and I do have trigger warnings with this presentation. Wounds, war, maggots, flies, feces, death, injury, to the flies, and there is also a mention of death with humans as well. And I'll be talking about an entangled exploration, the past, present, and future symbiotic relationship between fly species, sericata, Lucilia sericata, and humans. So the larvae of fly species Lucilia sericata, common name green bottle fly, are the main species used in medical wound management of humans, and also in veterinary practice because they don't eat the healthy tissue. As a registered adult nurse and as an anthrozoologist, I was intrigued to learn more about this entangled relationship. And as I've said, I'm a registered human nurse, but I'm not a specialist tissue viability nurse, a TVN. I don't specialise in wound care. Although during my general training and role as a nurse, I have managed wounds, and consequently I have smelt necrotic infected wounds and seen the pain, embarrassment and discomfort that some human patients can experience from chronic infected and diabetic wounds. I have not, however, dealt with larval debridement therapy, or LDT, or it is also known as maggot debridement therapy, MDT. And I'll use the terms maggot and larva interchangeably throughout this presentation. As a nurse and reading the literature, the use of larval debridement therapy to debride, that is to clear away the dead necrotic tissue, have been shown to be beneficial for patients. And I care about the well-being of my patients as per my nursing code of conduct. And I'm aware of the future risks of losing antibiotics due to resistances. But as an anesthesiologist, the disposal of these larvae after use makes me feel uncomfortable. And for those who have read Jamie Lorimer's article on orcs and awkwardness, this does make me feel awkward. For me, using them as co-workers, maybe they are content to eat, but as humans, what are we offering from outside of the symbiotic relationship to these entangled, as Donna Haraway talks about, kin? So I wanted to learn more about this history, what actually happens currently, and as an anesthesiologist, try to explore this situation by searching for the biography of this fly species. What is their story? Who are they? And why should we care about a mutually symbiotic relationship with this species of insect? On the screen, can you see, is that in the way? Is that better?
It looks normal to me.
It looks normal, does it? Okay. So why green bottles? As I sat looking out a window, contemplating my abstract for this presentation that I had just submitted, a green bottle fly landed on my hand. Green and shiny, I marvelled at their beauty, and I tried to capture a photo of this moment, although a bit blurry there, to remind me why I wanted to tell you part of their story with humans, and to investigate further whether humans can improve our impact on and relationship with the fly, and in particular a species, in this case Lucilia. As a nurse, I'd listened with interest to anecdotal accounts of many stories from friends, family, nursing colleagues. Some of disgust, some of curiosity, some describing the wigglingness of the maggots, some horrified at what they've seen with fly strike in sheep. And but as mentioned, when it came to the use of the maggots, I felt an awkwardness for this smaller species, such as insects. Why should we be concerned about a faceless maggot? In her book, Dr. Erica McAllister states that in the UK, over 32,000 invertebrates, of which more than 7,000 species are flies, which means that in the UK, 1 in every 5 species of invertebrate is a fly. And McAllister goes on to sort of put this into perspective, that there are approximately only 5,400 species of mammals on the entire planet. So we are talking about an awful lot of those animals around us. And although they are classed as animals, insects don't necessarily have the animal rights that are given to other animals then. So I did my master's in anesthesiology at Exeter. For one of my early essays, the health module, I looked at green bottles, and this presentation pulls from that essay. So why, as anesthesiologists, should we be looking at the likes of maggots, and what can we achieve? So I've got, and I'll be covering these various points for the next few slides. So trigger warnings: wounds, war, maggots, flies, death. I did want to, this next slide here, I did want to show a short video of this fly on the table. I was out and about, I saw this Greenbottle, I chose to sit at their table and enjoy their company. And the Greenbottle continued with their activity, flitting around some spilt drink. And it made me think of the term umwelt. And even though we were in the same space, we were in our own worlds. So green bottleflies, the shiny metallic green bodies of the order Diptera, which means two-winged, are true flies, unlike dragonflies, butterflies, and bees, which have four wings and are probably more popular species within the insect world. Instead of the extra wings, they have these halteres which help with balance during flight. They are of the family Callifidae, the blowflies, who lay their eggs in dead and dying tissue. And the necrophagous species of insects and invertebrates, as Dr. Erica McAllister says in her book, that if it weren't for these little organic munchers, we would be knee-high in dead bodies with corpses floating around in a quagmire of putrefying organs. So they really do have an important role out there. Green bottleflies have 4 distinct stages in their life cycle: egg, larva, or maggot, of which there are 3 instars, pupa, during which complete metamorphosis occurs, and the adult stage. And perhaps people don't always associate the fly with having other stages within that life cycle. So the animal biography, who is Lucilia sericata? This the image here shows not a faceless maggot. And even though this image shows a picture of a blue bottle larva, which is within the same family Calliphoridae, so not a green bottle, it shows that, you know, they're not faceless, really. You've got fangs there, you can see you know, there's quite a lot of detail there, whereas when you're looking at them all en masse, you don't necessarily see that individual. The Erica McAllister talks about most larvae are hard to identify. Let me just go back to the last slide there. Most larvae are very hard to identify, often with very few identifiable morphological structures, and so are just ignored by biologists. So it's, you know, you can understand why certain species within the insect world are not necessarily considered in the same way as other species, which is maybe why we should look at this as anthrozoologists more, because there's many out there. I will talk later a little bit about the themes that I pulled, because I did a literature search and looked at various themes, looking at thematic analysis. And those themes mainly talked about larvae like pieces of equipment, how to keep them alive in order to carry out their job, how to contain them, how to prevent escapees, and very much anthropocentric, what was important for the healthcare staff, the patient, for the compliance in their use. Literature very much looked at the human culture in art, poetry, medical history, and the zoology-based articles. We're looking very much at the behaviour, as you would expect there. But bringing it all together, you can see that biography and anecdotal accounts as well, and people's experiences, I think are really important to sort of draw everything together. Let's see. Sorry, I've just lost where I'm a bit. So this next slide, I put this in. It's anecdotal, but it was again while I was out. I was thinking about this presentation, and I was on a man-made floor. There was nothing else around, and there were 2 pupae on the floor. And thankfully I didn't step on them. Didn't know where they were, didn't know where they'd come from. I carefully gathered them up on some tissue paper. And I follow a Facebook group who are very good at identifying invertebrates in UK and Europe. And I put these little pictures out, asking if anyone knew what they were, that I'd picked them up. And I didn't get a definitive answer as to what species they are from the pupa. You know, it's quite difficult, although I'm frequently amazed by what people can identify. But hopefully when they emerge, I'll be able to get a more definitive answer. But what I thought was really interesting were these 2 comments here. And it shows a range of responses, quite a negative response of disgust here, and another one, thank you for caring there. And it was an explaining actually the great pollinators decompose as part of the ecosystem. And it's quite interesting and to consider what a different response I would have got if I'd put a butterfly or chrysalis up there. So looking at contamination and disease, Connor 2006 quotes, although flies can bring into our houses and onto our plates organisms that we prefer to hold to safe and hygienic distance, the restriction of their range means that they bring back to us mostly our own. Flies bring us disconcertingly to ourselves. Now, Connor's possibly talking about the housefly here, but this could also be applicable to the greenbottle. The greenbottles in these images that I took, these photos that I took in August, were not a close distance to each other, but one shows 2 greenbottles on some dog feces. It was really interesting watching them moving around and interacting with each other. The other is an image of a greenbottle fly that landed on some leaves at a party that I was at, and the guest had been flicking the flies away. McAllister writes that in 1929, there was a study of Lucilia species and Califora species, like blue bottles, in the slums of China. And they were found to have, on average, 3.5 million bacterium per fly. In comparison, I don't have to hand any details about how many bacterium the average human carries. McAllister states, although regarded by many as a disease carrier that vomits over our food, the fly earns nothing more from us humans than feelings of disgust. So trigger warning here, we're talking about war, wounds, maggots, and death. And this entanglement looks at examples of maggot and fly use through culture and history. So I've listed various examples. And as we've seen through history, war brings about many innovations, and larval debridement therapy shows how developments have been made from seeing maggots at work on battlefields to taking them in, finding how to sterilize them so that the bacteria that's attached to the maggots is not going to be spread to the wound, therefore creating that sort of better healing environment, sterile environment. And I'd like to read a poem, if that's okay, which describes a battlefield from the anthropomorphic lens of a fly. And it's about the Battle of Crécy, which was in 1346 in northern France. And although this talk's not necessarily about a green bottle fly, the fly in this poem could be of the blowfly family, of which the green bottle is part of. So The Fly by Miroslav Holub, a poet and immunologist. She sat on a willow trunk watching part of the Battle of Crécy, the shouts, the gasps, the groans, the trampling and the tumbling. During the 14th charge of the French cavalry, she mated with a brown-eyed male fly from Vandecourt. She rubbed her legs together as she sat on a disemboweled horse, meditating on the immortality of flies. With relief, she alighted on the blue tongue of the Duke of Clervaux. When silence settled and only the whisper of decay softly circled the bodies and only a few arms and legs still twitched jerkily under the trees, she began to lay her eggs on the single eye of Johan the royal armourer. And thus it was that she was eaten by a swift, fleeing from the fires of Estrys. So, although this is anthropomorphic, it's looking at what possibly was happening from the fly perspective, it does give us an insight of that history, that entanglement that we've had with the species and flies over time there. And looking at this list, one thing I'd like to just point out, Arthur Bryant, Erica McAllister talks about, he had magatoriums. He was a maggot breeder for fishing bait. And it was found that the fumes from that the maggots gave off were beneficial for against TB. So, you know, there's potential for the future there. So the next slides that I've got, just be aware that there are images of wounds and maggots in a bag which is used to house maggots to stop them being free range with wound management. So this here we've got Chung et al. 2024, this hybrid approach to sacral sore management. And the sacral area is at the base of the spine, and you can, which is a particularly risk of pressure damage. And you can see here in the first image, this sluffiness and this discharge, and it doesn't look very clean and healthy at all. There was some surgical cleanup, and the next image you can see that a dressing had been placed around to protect the healthy skin, and the inside had been sort of surgically cleaned. And you can see there's a little bag here which houses the maggots, and there's a little piece which is a spacer which allows the maggots to move around, and the maggots are able to eat the dead necrotic tissue through that mesh. And then you can see this last one. I moved the image around a little bit so it's all showing in the same direction, but you can see here that the site is looking a lot cleaner, and it's ready for that flap reconstruction. This next slide, you can see in the background by Collier and 2010, you can see in the background the diabetic sort of footals are there, and here you can see the little tea bag containing the maggots, so that they're not free range here. And these ones are a lot larger than previously, and you can see that well, this bag, I'm guessing, would probably just have been disposed of as clinical waste. One of the anecdotes that I'd heard about was where a nurse had been asked if they could put the maggots from the patient's dressings on a compost heap, but because they're considered as a biohazard, that hadn't been possible. These images are of somebody on Sean and Lee 2020, of somebody who came in with wild maggots in place, and it shows the maggots in the wound between these digits. The removal of the maggots, after 1 day, you can see this area starting to heal, and then after 7 days, the area has sort of healed there. They would have been probably given, I expect, antibiotics as well. So I mentioned about the importance of flies with pollination. And you can here are a selection of flies, including a green bottle in my garden. And when I was looking at the literature, I used a reflexive thematic analysis, gathering themes from the literature that I'd pulled, and narrowing it down to two. It was interesting seeing human reactions and the actions to that. So putting these maggots within cages, it being very anthropocentric, being more accepting for the human, But there was also talk of like disgust, curiosity, people not necessarily wanting to have the maggots because their spouse wouldn't be happy with maggots being in the house. The other theme that I found was quite interesting was this medical machinery. And Lucilia sericata, from what I've read, it's almost like the Swiss Army knife of the insect world. The fumes, TB, the wiggling, the movement, helping with that, helping with the wound site and to encourage recovery, the munching, that necrotic tissue, MRSA, that superbug, that resistant bacteria. The secretions, what they excrete has actually is being researched, and in 2010, I believe there's sericata, an antibiotic. So these antibiotic properties from the secretions. It was also, this theme looking at the sort of the medical equipment and then being seen as this biohazard, sterilizing them before use. We sterilize medical equipment, single use only, they're disposable. Veal et al., 1933, found that they died on healthy tissue. So they are really just working on the what we don't want, getting rid of that. But I don't know what for the future for humans and other animal species, important to humans because they are being used in the veterinary world as well. Bacteria management, as I've said, the antibiotics. Maybe we could be looking at return of maggotoriums in the future. But what for Lucilia, the Lucilia species? Can we see them as co-workers? Can we give them a retirement package like racehorses, greyhounds, other species have retirement packages? I've got various ideas, but that's something that I would really like to look into further. And just for clarity at the end, I've put definitions of symbiosis, that you have the association where two species, one which benefits and the other is neither harmed nor benefited, that eating at that same table, the form where one organism is held or made use of another as if it were a slave, and then you've got that mutualism, that symbiosis in which both organisms contribute mutually to the well-being of each other.